The struggle on the confirmation of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, in the U.S. ended with a clear victory of the administration and the supporters of the deal. But the debate didn't end. And if I'll try to clean the politics of the debate, then I would say that, as usual, there are two schools of thoughts. There is the school of thought that emphasizes the risks and the repercussions of the agreement, and there is the school of thought that emphasizes the benefits of the agreement and the opportunities that it opens. Of course, the discourse in the United States is very important for us, understanding the importance of the strategic relationship between the United States and Israel, and how much we are dependent on the United States. I am glad to chair this session, not only because the subject is interesting, but because I know very well the four speakers, and I have high regard for them. Because of the shortage of time, I will introduce very shortly each one of them, only a sentence, and I will ask them to limit their presentations to 15 minutes, please. The first speaker is Mr. רוברט איינהורן, that is a senior fellow in the Arms Control and Non-Proliferation Initiative and the Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence, both of them at the Brookings Institutes, and a very old end on arms control and non-proliferation in the old ACDA and in the State Department. Please, Bob.
Shlomo, thank you. Amos, thank you very much. Ephraim, for organizing this. Thanks for inviting us to INSS. I'm not here to re-argue the merits of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA. I want to talk about, moving on to implementing the deal. And so I will briefly address how things have gone to date, some of the challenges that lie ahead, and what approach we should take to ensuring the effective implementation of the deal. Now, implementation began in earnest on October 18th, so-called Adoption Day. And so far, things they are dismantling. These are first-generation IR-1 centrifuges. Iran sees no future for them in its nuclear program, so they're doing it, one senior American said, at a breakneck speed. Iran is also making advanced preparations for shipping out the large quantity of enriched uranium stocks that they have on their territory. They're going to be shipping those stocks to Russia. The parties are talking about redesigning the Iraq heavy water reactor so that it can produce weapons-grade plutonium, and getting ready to remove the core, the calandria, from the reactor. The Russians and the Iranians are talking about converting the Fordo underground enrichment facility from the production of enriched uranium to the production of stable isotopes. The IAEA is gearing up for enhanced monitoring that it will be required to do under the JCPOA and installing sophisticated new equipment. The U.S. and the European Union have already taken legal steps to get ready for the formal suspension of sanctions on so-called Implementation Day, which is still several months away. As expected, Iran has tried to cut some corners and settle some unresolved or ambiguous matters in a manner that is favorable to them. But the U.S. has strongly resisted these efforts. It's insisted on strict adherence to the JCPOA, and what I'm told is that some of the early differences, the early issues, have been resolved quite satisfactorily. The Supreme Leader, in a letter, a guidance letter to President Rouhani, said that Iran will only take certain nuclear steps after the IAEA board has closed the file, closed the issue of the possible military dimensions of Iran's nuclear program, the so-called PSD issue. So Iran has held off on shipping the enriched uranium stocks to Russia. They've held off on removing the calandria from the Iraq reactor, and so far they've only dismantled centrifuges that were idle, not ones that were operational and producing enriched uranium. But American officials are pretty confident that Iran can still fulfill the requirements under the JPOA by mid-January, perhaps late January. Now, Iran is eager to get the job done quickly, because the sooner it gets the job done, the sooner that sanctions will be suspended. And President Rouhani and his supporters believe that early suspension will give them a boost in the February 26 Majlis election that's fast approaching. Meanwhile, on the sanction side, we all know that trade delegations are making their way to Tehran. Businesses around the world want to start or resume operations in Tehran, and they're talking to the Iranians about deals. But we've heard, and we recently met with senior Treasury officials, we've heard that no one is signing any contracts. Businesses around the world know that sanctions remain in place today and won't be suspended for several months. And they're not, actually consummating deals. Indeed, investors around the world are expected to take a very cautious approach, even after sanctions are suspended. They know that some U.S. primary and secondary sanctions will remain even after implementation day, and they don't want to run afoul of U.S. sanctions. And they are reluctant to make long-term, very expensive investments in Iran, given the possibility that sanctions may someday be reimposed, and given the uncertainties surrounding the U.S. presidential election in 2016. But they're also cautious because Iran remains a very unpromising place to do business. It ranks 118th among the world's economies in terms of the ease of doing business. So investors are being very cautious. So to sum up, in 6 weeks after Adoption Day, things are going very much as well as anyone could have expected. But significant challenges lie ahead. There are important technical matters that are quite consequential and still unresolved. An example is how do you maintain a ceiling, a very low ceiling of 300 kilograms of enriched uranium in Iran when they're continuing to produce more enriched uranium? How do you ensure that that level is sustained? Or how do you assign performance levels to advanced centrifuges, measured in SWUs, or separative work units? How do you assign performance levels? And it's very important because it will determine how many of these advanced machines can actually be deployed. So there are many issues like that, and neither side is showing much flexibility in addressing them. Another challenge is maintaining strong international support for strict enforcement of compliance. There's a concern in Washington that if some countries develop a strong commercial or political stake in relations with Iran, they may become reluctant to raise compliance issues. They may be reluctant to reimpose sanctions if and when warranted. A major challenge comes from the Iranian hardliners, especially the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. We know that they don't want the deal to succeed. They believe that the nuclear deal will threaten their privileged position in the Iranian economy. They fear it'll open up Iran to Western influences and threaten the very pillars of the Islamic Republic. And they also believe a successful agreement will strengthen the position of their rivals, the Iranian moderates. And the hardliners, especially the IRGC intelligence operation, have begun a very serious crackdown, a post-agreement crackdown against Iranians who support domestic reforms and who want better relations with the West. They've sentenced an Iranian-American journalist. They've incarcerated an Iranian-American businessman, and clearly their motive is to discourage engagement. The supreme leader, after endorsing the nuclear deal, has compensated for that endorsement by siding with the hardliners. Among other things, he said that any new U.S. sanctions, for whatever reason, would be a violation of the JCPOA and would justify Iran not fulfilling its commitments. Well, the U.S. fully intends to impose new sanctions for terrorism, human rights, missile activities, and other reasons, all of which are not precluded by the JCPOA. Now, if Iran responds by not meeting its commitments, this will be a serious challenge to the sustainability of the nuclear deal. But hardliners might seek to sabotage the deal in other ways, such as denying IAEA access to military and other sensitive facilities. A final challenge to the JCPOA is provocative Iranian external behavior outside the nuclear deal itself, such as support for Hezbollah, increased direct military involvement in Syria, and continued ballistic missile activity. I believe Tom is likely to address a number of these regional issues, so I won't dwell on them, only to point out that even though these provocations don't violate the JCPOA, they can certainly weaken support for the agreement in the United States, and that will jeopardize the long-term viability of the deal. So I'll close with some brief suggestions for how to promote effective implementation. First, there should be a policy of zero tolerance for Iranian noncompliance. We fully expect Iran to keep testing the boundaries of compliance. If they get no resistance, then they will continue to try to push those boundaries. From the outset, we need to create an expectation in Iran that it would be held accountable for any violations, large or small. Second, we should encourage key international partners, especially the Europeans, to enforce existing sanctions, to be prepared to snap back sanctions in the case of major violations, and to impose lesser penalties in the case of smaller infractions. Third, the U.S. must be prepared whenever warranted to adopt new non-nuclear sanctions for supporting terrorism, abusing human rights, engaging in ballistic missile activities, and so on. Iranians mustn't think the U.S. is so determined to preserve the deal that it would ignore these activities. At the same time, new sanctions must be well-targeted and justified. If we seem intent on undermining the legitimate benefits of sanctions relief, Iran will have little incentive to fulfill its commitments. Fourth, we need to maintain the solidarity of the P5+1. It was essential, this solidarity was essential in negotiating the nuclear deal. It will remain essential in implementing it. Russian allegiance with the other P5+1 countries will be absolutely essential. If Russia sides with Iran in implementation issues, Iran won't feel pressure to comply. Finally, Israel and the U.S. Need to coordinate very closely on implementing the deal. They both should consult regularly at both the policy and expert levels. They need to share intelligence on Iranian nuclear activities, including procurement. They should consult on a wide range of key implementation questions, especially when questions of compliance arise. Uzi, a few moments ago, talked about some difficulties in recent months in terms of U.S.-Israeli cooperation. I think that was, in fact, the case. The U.S. has not always been sufficiently transparent with Israel on the Iran issue, especially at the time of the so-called secret bilateral talks with Iran throughout 2013. But if Israelis want the U.S. to be open with them, to make them a genuine partner in implementing the deal, then Israel must demonstrate that it has genuinely turned the page, that it's prepared to work constructively to make the agreement succeed, and that it's not going to try to work against the deal. I think there's an obligation on both sides. Mutual trust has been eroded. It must be built up in the period ahead if the Iran deal is to be successful. Thank you very much.